Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a UK, EU, US, Iran political update, or an analysis really of what has happened over the last couple of days with regard to Keir Starmer, but also Pedro Sánchez from Spain and Emmanuel Macron from France and Friedrich Merz from Germany, what their position, our positions are on the Iran conflict and how the US is reacting to it, with an initial focus on the UK. I am from the UK, and I've got a horse in this race, right? But then we'll go on to the rest of Europe, or some more of Europe. It is a very controversial situation at the moment, but it shouldn't be. This kind of divergence between the US and, for example, the UK has happened before. We've had the Vietnam War, where Harold Wilson didn't commit UK forces to that at all. We had the Suez Canal conflict, where the US didn't help us out. There was the issue between Margaret Thatcher and Reagan over Grenada. There was also the Falkland Islands. So there are a number of times when our nations have diverged. And although we have this so-called special relationship, it hasn't been the end of the world, right? Keir Starmer, with half an eye on Iraq and the arguably unlawful war, illegal war in Iraq, as many people saw it and still see it, with half an eye on that as a lawyer, he didn't want to get too involved in the war in Iran from an offensive point of view. But that has annoyed the Americans, and Donald Trump has very publicly responded. We're going to look at this. Okay. And that's the kind of context. It changed when there's now some new data coming out to suggest the drone wasn't Iranian, but there was a drone that we thought was Iranian that hit the airbase, the RAF base in Akrotiri in Cyprus, and with also threats to other entities concerned with the UK and our own citizens, we decided to help defensively by taking out drones and missiles on a way into our airspace, or Cypriot airspace, or elsewhere. But also, if push comes to shove, to follow that back to the source, the air defense system, if necessary. And then we allowed the US to use our base in Diego Garcia and Fairford in the UK in order for them to do similarly, although it wasn't allowing them to do all their offensive work, right? So there was a change, but that was in light of new data. Iran has been doing these crazy things of attacking all sorts. In fact, Azerbaijan was on the hit list today, but the Iranians have denied that, and there are some theories to suggest that these could be false flag attacks from Israelis pretending to, sending supposed Iranian shaheeds into nations that would get angry and then respond to Iran. And actually, that theory abounds concerning the drone that flew at the RAF base in Akrotiri. Like, where did that come from? Was it Hezbollah in Lebanon? Well, what's that got to do with the price of fish? And there is a theory that the Israelis are doing this, but I have no idea. I've got no data on it either way, right? But it is interesting that the UK has now said it wasn't Iran. Okay. As I say, that's the context. Before we get into the finer details, please remember to like, subscribe, and share. Keep yourselves in the loop. Help out with the channel. And it would be truly appreciated. Right, let's get to the details. So here we have part of what was initially said. I've already gone through Keir Starmer's whole remarks in Prime Minister's questions the other day. He gave a good 12-minute speech that I think laid very clearly out the British position. Here is one of his responses.
Exposing our military personnel to action that risks their lives, making sure that it is lawful before we ask them to do that. I think that is the duty of the Prime Ministers. A previous Prime Minister has taken exactly the same approach. I will, of course, read the Shadow Attorney's advice, but I'm very clear in the advice that I received, and I will not commit our military personnel to unlawful action. That is not what they would expect and deserve. They are entitled to better than that.
And I think that's an absolutely fair enough response from Keir Starmer there. Now, This then elicited a retort from Donald Trump when he received Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor, in the White House, and he was pretty typical in his response. But this was not good news for the UK-US relationship.
They've been Spain has been very, very uncooperative, and so has UK. Now, the second one is shocking, but this is not the age of Churchill. I will say the UK has been very, very uncooperative with that stupid island that they have, that they gave away and took a 100-year lease, having to do with perhaps indigenous people claiming the island that never even saw the island before. What's that all about? And
there is something to say, and other commenters have noted this, that he doesn't really seem to understand the Chagos archipelago, the Diego Garcia base that's there, and the history of the whole situation. I think he's just fed what enough for him to be able to denigrate it in public, but he clearly has no expert understanding of the situation.
They ruin relationships. It's a shame. It's and that country, UK, and I love that country. I love it. My mother was born there. I love it. My mother was born there. My father was born. Like, he knows all about my father. My father.
His father was born in New York, I think, in Bronx in New York. His grandfather was born in Germany. So you can't even get his own family details right here. Honestly, he's an absolute gibbon.
Father was born there, so, you know, very places that you sort of automatically very feel warmly about. But the UK, what they're doing with energy and what they're doing with immigration is horrible. You have the North Sea. Somebody said yesterday, what would you do if you were the UK? Open up the North Sea. They got windmills all over the place that are ruining the country, ruining the landscapes, ruining the beautiful fields. Open up the North Sea. It's one of the greatest. Think of it. They buy their energy from Norway, which gets the energy, the oil, from the North Sea. So Norway drills in the North Sea and sells it to UK. And UK has a better part of the North Sea. Open up that. And number two, illegal immigration. They got to solve that problem. And I must say, that's not only UK, that's other parts of the European Union that have the same problem. Immigration and energy. The energy is through the roof, the highest in the world.
And we do have very high energy costs, but it's actually as a result of gas. Gas is more expensive, and we have marginal pricing, which prices our energy at the most expensive production. And yeah, so he's saying we do buy gas from Norway. Our gas in the North Sea is depleting. I don't really want to go into the long weeds of this all, but he doesn't know what he's talking about really with regard to anything that he mentions. And actually elsewhere he talks about Sharia law. It's like he's reading the Daily Express or listening to Nigel Farage and then regurgitating this nonsense. Anyway, this was seen as a real rebuke of the UK. It's no Winston Churchill, but the idea is actually Churchill asked for the US to come and help the UK in the Second World War, and it took them 2 years and the bombing of Pearl Harbor to actually agree to that. So, I mean, and interestingly, Churchill was involved, I think, possibly quite controversially with Iran too, was he not? In the after the Second World War, in the early 50s or something. Anyway, it is really quite a poor comparison there. But anyway, more on some of that in a little while. Let's just remind ourselves that there is no coherent plan for the Americans with Iran, as according to those who were party to the classified briefing the other day. Well, I've already done a video earlier today on all of the different arguments, the rationale, the varying rationale from the American government, from Donald Trump to JD Vance to Marco Rubio to Pete Hegseth. They're all coming up with different reasons why the Americans have committed to the war. And of course, without a clear plan of what's going to take place, without a clear set of objectives, why would the UK commit to supporting the US? There's a complete lack of clarity there. This is Congressman Seth Magaziner.
I just left a classified briefing about the Iran war given by the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the CIA director, and other administration officials. And while I can't reveal everything that was said in the briefing, here are my key takeaways. Number one, there is no intelligence that suggests that Iran was planning an attack against the United States. Number two, the administration does not have any plan for what is going to happen to Iran after the war is over. Iran is a country of 90 million people with an armed forces that number nearly 1 million. The biggest question I hear from Rhode Islanders is, why are we in yet another Middle Eastern war? And unfortunately, the Trump administration is still not giving members of Congress or the American people any answers.
Okay, so again, that's where we are with regard to the lack of clarity from the Americans with regard to the war, the conflict, the strikes. Gandalf here says, the report, so what are we hearing? This is from The Guardian. US did not share details with the UK before attacking Iran, sources say. This is the same across NATO. I don't think no one knew about this. No one knew what was going to happen. The idea that we should just give carte blanche, open book for the Americans to do what they like without knowing anything about what they're doing, what they're planning, is ridiculous. So those in the media in the UK and those on the political right in the UK who are denigrating Starmer's position, they are advocating for us to get involved in an illegal, unconstitutional war, much like Iraq. So these are the same people that are saying, hey, what the Labour government did back in Blair's time was illegal, and we're going to absolutely excoriate the government for having done that. We're going to spend decades doing that. But then when it comes to the Labour government refusing to replicate what happened arguably before in us following blindly the Americans into the Middle East, now Keir Starmer and the government have learned from that. Now those same people who denigrated us for doing that before are saying, why aren't you doing that now? The hypocrisy is insane. And not only why aren't you doing it, but why aren't you doing it without even knowing anything to do with the scope and the rationale for the attack before, during, now? Absolutely ridiculous. Gandalf says, the reporting suggests a sharp reality behind the special relationship. According to sources cited by The Guardian, the US did not brief the UK on the timing of operational details before joining Israel's strikes on Iran, even though London had visibility of the broader build-up through intelligence and movements. The backdrop is political and practical. Starmer initially withheld permission for the US to use the UK sovereign bases, and then later approved a more limited defensive role as regional retaliation escalated, while insisting the UK was not part of this initial strike package. The message is hard to miss. Washington expects access and alignment, but will act unilaterally when it suits, leaving allies in to manage the exposure, the blowback, and the domestic fallout. If the UK is not trusted with the plan, but is still expected to provide the platform, what exactly is special here in this so-called special relationship? Now, it's the special relationship has been then called into question, with the right-wing media in the UK going to town on Keir Starmer, and the politicians of the opposition going to town on Keir Starmer, and he reacted fairly forthrightly in Prime Minister's questions here, talking about the special relationship.
Operating out of British bases. That is the special relationship in action. British jets are shooting down drones and missiles to protect American lives in the Middle East on our joint bases. That is the special relationship in action. Sharing intelligence every day to keep our people safe. That is the special relationship in action. Hanging on to President Trump's latest words is not the special relationship in operating.
So, and that's a really good point. Like, hanging on Trump's words, like you guys are, that's not a special relationship. It goes deeper than that. It's actions and not words. And this is what we're doing. And that is part of the special relationship. You guys shut up type thing. Now, Lewis Goodall, the reporter for the news agents, says it's being said a lot that the shadow of Iraq is hanging over Keir Starmer and the Labour Party during this Iran crisis. It absolutely should. What's remarkable is how much of the British media and the rest of politics seems to be thinking about it at all or learning its lessons. Those lessons are far deeper and broader than the danger of boots on the ground. Absolutely incredible. And you've got Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the opposition in the UK, calling for a full-throated support, and Nigel Farage, of the Americans here, again, without the necessary legal justification or clarity of the plans, the objectives, the goals, what the Americans are hoping to do after all the bombing is done with regard to regime change. Are you stuck in Iran for decades trying to make sure that some new government is propped up in whatever way you think? So, yeah, I think this Matthew Todd here sums it up for me. Although I'm not a fan of Starmer, I'm kind of ambivalent. I'm not a fan of Starmer, this guy says, but whatever he does, literally whatever he does, is ripped apart, ripped to shreds by the Telegraph, the Mail, the Express, the Sun, the Spectator, the very same people who installed Boris Johnson and the appalling Liz Truss, the same people who installed the governments that caused Brexit and the financial crisis that has ensued, the same people who have driven the country into the ground. I'm sick to death of them. They are the biggest threat to the country and all of us across the board. No matter what our politics are, we need to get billionaires out of the media. And I have a lot of sympathy for that view. And again, the Daily Express, I showed you papers from yesterday. This is them again today, supporting Kemi Badenoch. Week. Kemi Badenoch blasts the Prime Minister for prioritizing his job security over national security. What they don't say is that she wants us to go into an illegal war with the Americans and put our own service personnel at risk. Just absolutely ridiculous. And as Tim Walker points out here, the polls suggest the British press is seriously out of sync with how most ordinary decent people regard Israel and America's war on a whim. So actually, it's an unpopular thing for the British public, this, to get involved and do whatever Trump wants us to do. And so these papers just are not reflecting the position of the people. This is an interesting sort of tongue-in-cheek view from I don't know who wrote it. It's from The Critic. It's a little known fact about Kemi Badenoch that years ago she must have suffered a traumatic brain injury that has left her completely unable to recall any event after 2002. So we're talking like Gulf 2. That may sound ridiculous, but once you know it, it explains an awful lot about British politics. Take, for instance, Wednesday's Prime Minister's questions. The Tory leader demanded to know why Britain wasn't joining the Americans in attacking Iran. That's a brilliant question if, like Badenoch and apparently her entire team, you have absolutely no knowledge of UK involvement with events in the Middle East 2003 to the present day. Otherwise, even the most slow-witted MP would get a pretty handy clue from the first three letters of the country's name, the target country's name. In other words, IRA, Iran, Iraq. It's pretty similar, but you appear to have completely compartmentalized your brain and memory to maybe you're too young really to remember the impact of Iraq on the national psyche, on our political landscape. A Daily Mail: Iran strikes pummeled Trump approval to all-time low as Americans turn on war. He said he'd be the peace president. So now we have the Daily Mail attacking Donald Trump for wanting to go to war, whereas the day before they were attacking Starmer for not going to war with Trump. It is absolutely insane. Damien Lowe says, yet 2 hours earlier, you had a headline berating Starmer for not joining in with Trump. You can't make this stuff up. It is absolutely crazy. Now, I absolutely love this. This is Sir Richard Dalton, who's a former senior member of the British Diplomatic Service, being interviewed on LBC by Nick Ferrari, who's basically pretty much super right wing, who then asks him a ridiculous question. And it's this position that, if you're not for Trump, you must love the Ayatollah Khamenei. If you're not completely supporting the American attack, then therefore you love the Iranian regime. And how many times I've gone through this? We must be able to hold two ideas on our head at once. I've responded to so many people on the comments threads. No, I'm not a big fan of the Ayatollah. No, I don't like Iranian terrorism. but also I don't like illegal wars, right? And we have to have legal justification, constitutional justification if you're American. And there should be a better way of doing this, or you wait until there is legal justification for it. And this is what Sir Richard Dalton, how he responded to the ridiculous questioning from Nick Ferrari.
States, many people pleaded for the United States to treat them seriously, but plainly they did not.
But what is it you admire most about the former Ayatollah's regime then?
What a daft question.
Why is that a daft question?
I haven't indicated any admiration for the Ayatollah's regime.
My understanding, and you'll be closer to it than I. My understanding is, and you'll be closer to ISA, Richard, there were people being killed.
Would you suggest that that's what
Because if you let me answer, my understanding, and you're closer to it than I, is this is a regime that was killing certainly possibly 5,000, possibly 35,000 of his own people, and imprisoning thousands more. It was a regime that I would have thought needed to go. So I'm asking, what possibly could it be that you admired in that regime?
There are a great many regimes around the world which need to go. But the important issue for Britain's national security is the framework set out after the end of the First World War to minimize the chances of the law of the jungle taking over from international law should be preserved. I'm afraid that our right-wingers, including Jeremy Hunt, are forgetting the lessons of the sacrifices of 20th century generations to try and prevent the law of strong powers overwhelming the rights of nations. And as a relatively weak power, United Kingdom security is dependent long-term on re-establishing the rule of law. Now, we didn't go in with the United States on Vietnam or on Somalia.
But I just
wonder. We didn't participate in the war of choice against Yemen. It's nothing extraordinary for us to take a different position from the United States. And the people who are panicking about it are the Americans, because it's their domestic political problem, which they fear we have exacerbated.
Lastly, I wonder, Sir Richard...
He was angry there, and rightfully so. Nick Ferrari with this stupid question. Here we have James O'Brien on LBC, a completely different presenter.
It's the proudest I've been of our Prime Minister in a very long time.
By the way, I'm not happy with the UK either.
I haven't felt very proud of our Prime Minister lately, or indeed of our country's performance on many, many stages.
This is not Winston Churchill that we're dealing with.
The reason it's good for Keir Starmer is that it completely shuts down one wing of criticism. If Donald Trump is publicly slagging him off in public, it's going to be very hard to sustain the argument that Keir Starmer has become some sort of poodle.
UK has been very, very uncooperative with that stupid island that they have.
It leaves all the people on the right forced to pretend that they can't remember Iraq. They have to close their eyes to the fact that Trump is the most unreliable player on the world stage. And they have to, of course, hope that you won't notice that they're about to cause another refugee crisis, which much of their political status depends upon attacking.
What's that all about?
It's the proudest...
That's a really good point, that last one about the refugee crisis. So we've had Nigel Farage giving his full-throated support for Trump's war in Iran. And then when questioned about, well, would you accept Iranian refugees that are actually presently flooding across the borders in some areas, he's a lot less sure about that. Of course, if you're really cynical, you say he might love a refugee crisis because that's what would give him, I think, a lot of ammunition in terms of campaigning. But it's the idea that you're up for a war, but you're not up for picking up the pieces of supporting that war, such as the refugees streaming across the border. Is absolutely despicable. Lewis Goodall again here says the number of commentators and journalists salivating at blaming Starmer for ruining the special relationship is genuinely pathetic. If anyone ruined it, if it even really exists, here's a reminder of who did it. So let's listen to an excerpt from the newsagent. This is John Sopel, formerly of the BBC, with Lewis Goodall, who has he's got a show on LBC now as well.
Be almost a gleeful delight in some of the newspaper coverage about an American president beating up a British Prime Minister. Of course, it's a good story if the US president is at odds with the British Prime Minister. I understand that. But it seems to be, come on, fantastic. Trump has said that Keir Starmer's a wanker. What more can we want?
Hail to the chief.
Exactly. And I just think there's something slightly odd about all of that.
And also, the logical corollary of like a lot of what these people are saying is basically that Britain should be an international eunuch. That honestly, that Britain should never and can never operate an independent foreign policy outside of the United States, no matter how unhinged the policy or the person of the President of the United States. That is not true. That's ahistorical. First of all, there have been plenty of British prime ministers over many decades. LBJ begged Harold Wilson to send a single battalion, a single like token presence to Vietnam to make it more international. Harold Wilson refused. It's now considered to be one of his finest hour as prime minister. For all we know, we could be sat in the middle of Keir Starmer's finest hour. I mean, as always, he doesn't explain it very well in a rather strangulated way, but that's by the by. And what I'll just say this, they're all saying that Starmer is imperiling the special relationship. I'm sorry, who is imperiling the special relationship? Let's just consider what Trump has done over the last 12 months. He's attacked our biggest ally, the Ukrainian president. He cozies up to Putin. He slaps us with tariffs. He's unreliable over Chagos. He refuses to sign a tech deal, or they pull out of it when they do. He insulted, just a month or so ago, he insulted our troops, saying they hadn't really made much of a contribution to Afghanistan. He threatens to invade a NATO sovereign ally. He constantly changes the justification for this war. His administration constantly interferes in our politics. He insults Keir Starmer's allies, including Sadiq Khan. His vice president and other ideologues lie about our country the entire time, including saying we don't have freedom of speech and have no-go zones. What is special about this relationship exactly? These people honestly want us to be supine and pathetic in the wake of constant aggression, and they have the audacity to call themselves patriots and lecture the rest of us. They can honestly just go and take a running jump.
Drop the mic. Lewis Goodall there. Honestly, I want to bottle that and I want to sell it. That is as good a synopsis of what is going on between the United States and the UK at the moment. And the idea that you've got these right-wing newspapers and right-wing politicians who are wanting us to support that man and that administration more than stand up for the safety of our own citizens. Absolutely incredible. So Lewis Goodall nailed it there. Alison Pearson, another one of these right-wing nut jobs. I love Trump trying to understand the Chagos deal. The same bafflement the rest of us feel, Donald. And Starmer is not Winston Churchill. So the idea that, I get you don't understand the Chagos deal because we don't either. And Starmer's no Winston Churchill. Don McGowan says, listening to Trump's incomprehensible waffling about the Chagos Islands yesterday made me realize he doesn't have the faintest idea what it's about. Not a freaking clue. Farage's current bandwagon is mounted on Trump hating the deal. It's absolute garbage. Trump is saying things he doesn't understand, but he's been told to say. And this is Reform UK's pet journalist confirming my suspicions, Alison Pearson there. So, there is this real pitch battle in the UK between the right wing and the further to the right wing and everyone else and the government. And the government cannot be congratulated for any decision. So whatever Starmer decides, they have to take the opposite. And even if it means jumping into bed and embracing the orange buffoon that is Donald Trump. Absolutely incredible stuff here. So Telegraph, Donald Trump has urged Sir Keir Starmer to restart North Sea drilling immediately to combat soaring energy prices by the US-led war with Iran, triggered by the US war with Iran. As someone says, this guy is completely crazy. He creates a situation without any consultation, then complains about it, and afterwards he starts making threats, even against his own allies. Worse, he doesn't threaten Putin, but instead prefers to threaten the EU, the United Kingdom, and France. The guy's a complete joke. Now, in terms of, we do buy gas from Norway, right? He's right there, but that's because Norway has better gas deposits in the North Sea than we do. He actually said the UK's got the better fields, not for gas. I don't know what it's like for oil, but for gas, that's not true. We've got depleted fields, and actually it's cheaper for us to get gas from the reliable, stable Norway than to start exploring and drilling more gas fields in the UK. And if you then say, well, you need to draw your own gas because then you get national security of their gas. That's not true. Gas goes onto the international market, and it's pegged to, we have a pricing scheme that's coupled to the international gas prices. So if that goes up, our domestic energy prices go up because we're too reliant on gas. Actually, we want to wean ourselves off gas. So this idea that we've got too many windmills on our beautiful fields is actually not that true. Most of our new wind farms with wind turbines are offshore wind turbines, and they are arguably generating a really decent amount of energy. And although they're not fully consistent, the wind dies down, then, it's not ideal. So we do need an energy mix. And that's why I'd say wind, solar, I'd say even tidal, and hydroelectric, and then a backup of nuclear, ideally. But Donald Trump is now threatening us over our energy sovereignty. It's our country, mate. Not only can we decide what we do with our armed forces, we can decide what we do with our energy mix. But he goes and threatens us left, right, and centre, and then says we've got Sharia law, as he said in another part of that speech. He's no Winston Churchill, and you guys have got Sharia law, and you need to drill for gas. It's like, no, we haven't. No, just go away. Just honestly, be quiet. So, Trump says Britain is being swayed by, quote, foreigners that hate you. This is another part of the speech I haven't played. Foreigners that hate you in a fresh crisis for a special relationship, amid warnings he could defy the Prime Minister to use UK bases for Iran strikes, says the Daily Mail again. It's really wanting to get on board with Trump and attack Farage. So Gandalf again says Trump blaming foreigners is pure cope. The UK is not being swayed by outsiders. It's reacting to 13 months of Trump, Vance and Rubio calling Britain and Europe losers and mocking allied veterans. You cannot insult allies, trash their sacrifices, and then demand their bases for your war. It is about, if this is about security or just bullying, is it about security or just bullying and blame shifting? And what is a special relationship worth if respect is optional? So this idea that foreigners are to blame, and he's also talked about how Starmer is just trying to appease the Muslim vote without understanding that actually the Sunni Muslim and Shia Muslim demographics are completely at odds with each other over this, obviously, because Iran is Shiite and most of the other countries around are Sunni. So if he's really, and actually most of the Muslims in the UK will be Sunni Muslims. But then there will be Shiite Muslims as well. And in fact, was not Iran one of our top refugee intakes recently? So the idea that we're just appeasing the Muslims, okay, we might have some rising Iranian Muslims coming in, but we have an established Sunni Muslim population, but actually, you can't treat them all as one monolithic entity. If we were really trying to support the Muslim community in the UK, we'd probably be going in and attacking Iran. Like, if you had a proper, accurate understanding of our Islamic demographics here, our Muslim demographics, we'd be supporting what most Sunnis you might think might want and attacking the Shiite country with the US. But no, so he just really doesn't know what he's talking about. Now, just going back to energy, good time to reflect on this. Gas sets the price of UK electricity 98% of the time, far more often than any other European countries. So the problem with us is our reliance on gas. We need to get off gas. Right, so him telling us to drill for more gas ourselves is actually just exactly the wrong thing for us to do. I mean, that's largely because of our marginal pricing structure and our reliance on gas, those two things together. That's why we've got particularly high energy costs in the UK rather than other countries. We need to wean ourselves off gas, and we need to decouple from the gas prices. End of. Trump, you don't know what you're talking about. Here's Ian Dale, who is a Conservative on LBC.
Thursday marks the 80th anniversary of the day that Winston Churchill coined the phrase the special relationship. 2 days before we mark that anniversary, Donald Trump has more or less shattered it with some incendiary remarks this afternoon about this country and our revered Prime Minister.
By the way, I'm not happy with the UK either. That island that you read about, the lease, okay, he made it for whatever reason, he made a lease of the island. Somebody came and took it away from him. This is not Winston Churchill that we're dealing with.
I've tried over the years to give Trump the benefit of
And by the way, that was even more so when we talked about Chagos earlier, he mentioned it once. He also mentioned it again. And that was kind of showing the lack of understanding over Chagos
That we're dealing with.
I've tried over the years to give Trump the benefit of the doubt, possibly too often. I've tried to be even-handed and give him credit where it's due. But there does come a time when you just have to face the reality that our main ally in the world has to be seen in a new light. Yesterday, I was highly critical of Keir Starmer's decision not to go in fully with the US and Israel, and I haven't changed my mind on that. I also said that he risked blowing up the special relationship and his American-facing foreign policy of the last 18 months. But however critical I am of Keir Starmer's decision, there's no excuse for the insults thrown Starmer's way by Trump today, which leads me to ask, should we now accept that the special relationship is at an end, as the US has proved and is proving itself to be an unreliable ally?
So Ian Dale says, look, I'm a critic of Keir Starmer. I'm a conservative. I think we should have gone full in with the US, but it doesn't excuse what the US is saying and how it's dealing with this situation. It's the end of the special relationship, but actually I'm laying that more at the feet of Donald Trump than I am at Keir Starmer. And just for a bit of more context about Winston Churchill, Donald Trump, this isn't Churchill we're dealing with. You're right, it isn't. Britain declared war on Nazi Germany in September 1939 for nearly 2 years before America entered the conflict after Pearl Harbor. Britain and the Commonwealth stood virtually alone against Hitler. London burned in the Blitz. Coventry was flattened. Families slept in underground stations, not knowing if their homes would survive the night. And it wasn't just Britain. So we're not talking about going and bombing some other foreign country. Britain was being absolutely shellacked by the Nazis, and we had the capital city being bombed relentlessly, and the US didn't come to our aid then. So how dare Donald Trump compare this situation? You know, there's a distinct irony here when Churchill asked for the Americans to come to our help when we were sheltering in the underground, and the Americans refused. Now the US is asking for us to help bomb a country without a plan, without legal justification, without a sense of what the hell they are trying to achieve other than flexing and doing whatever Benjamin Netanyahu tells them to do. And it wasn't just Britain. 2.5 million volunteers from the Indian subcontinent, the largest volunteer army in history, Canadians, Australians, New Zealanders, hundreds of thousands from Africa and the Caribbean. They fought from 1939 in North Africa, in the Atlantic, in Italy, in Burma, long before the United States entered the European war. When America did enter, it became decisive, but after victory, Britain was finally financially exhausted. In 1946, we borrowed $3.75 billion from the United States and $1.19 billion from Canada to rebuild a country that had poured everything into defeating fascism. And we honored that debt with interest. Britain repaid around $7.5 billion to America and about $2 billion to Canada, nearly $10 billion in total. The final payment was made in December 2006. 60 years after the war ended, Britain was still paying back what it owed. So yes, this isn't Churchill's war, but Britain still remembers what standing first looks like. You did come and help us. Thank you very much. And we paid you, literally paid you for it, for helping us. Now, okay, but it is galling when you hear Donald Trump sound off about things that he knows very little. But it's even more insulting when you've got opposition MPs just joining in with this attack on our government. And here is Kemi Badenoch from the Conservatives in PMQs, I think yesterday.
Understand his policy. He's got a sea of orcs and goons who have no idea how anything is working at all.
A sea of orcs and goons.
Mr. Speaker, they can complain all they like, Mr. Speaker. The fact is, they are letting down the people out.
Order. You can't do a point of order in the middle of Prime Minister's question.
Mr. Speaker.
Ask my question.
You don't listen to the questions anyway.
Mr. Speaker, the situation in Iran shows this Prime Minister has the wrong priorities. When it comes to defense, it's someone else's job. When it comes to welfare, they find the money. When our bases are attacked, they call the lawyers. When our energy security is under threat, they stop drilling in the North Sea. Mr. Speaker, the truth is, or in fact, Mr. Speaker, after last week's by-election, isn't the truth that he is...
The last week's by-election where they lost their deposit because they got so few votes, the Conservatives. They were absolutely destroyed. So it's rich coming from her anyway.
Isn't the truth? They might not like to hear it, but they are going to hear it, Mr. Speaker, whether they like it or not. Is it not the truth that he is prioritizing his job security over our national security?
Mr. Speaker, I spent the week protecting British lives and our national interest. And Mr. Speaker, moments like this define a leader of the opposition. They can either step up, act in the national interest and show that they're fit to be Prime Minister, or they can expose their utter irrelevance. She has chosen the second.
So basically calling her utterly irrelevant. I mean, you know, quite... And people are saying that when Keir Starmer's under the most pressure, he does the best job in these situations. And he really does get, you know, a bit of fire in his belly and actually performs a lot better. But here's Yvette Cooper also talking a tough line against Robert Jenrick, who went from the Conservatives. He was in the cabinet, he was Home Secretary, and then has defected to Reform, now criticising the Foreign Secretary, Yvette Cooper, over not having proscribed the IRGC, so essentially seeing them as a terrorist organisation. And that's the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And her response here, I mean, it's not very good quality. Some are recording off the TV, but her response is brilliant.
Well, I would just point out to the Right Honourable Member that I take the threats on UK streets immensely seriously, but he was a Home Office Minister and he was a Cabinet Minister during an entire...
Home Office Minister, not Home Secretary, Home Office Minister.
During an entire period when Iran-backed, state-backed threats had been seen on UK streets, and he did nothing to strengthen the legislation in so many years in government that this government is now taking forward to strengthen that legislation. Well,
She was annoyed, and rightly so. It's like, you spent 14 years, you're telling us we haven't done X, Y, and Z, and you didn't do it either for 14 years. And actually, we are strengthening the legislation. Anyway, you get the point. So the point is that there's this opportunism from the media and the political right in the UK that is just, they are attacking. And then you get it from the left as well, where you've got Jeremy Corbyn and Zach Polanski being opportunistic as well. But I don't think, you know, I don't mind the Greens per se at all. I voted Green previously in, I think, local election. I can't remember. But Zach Polanski, he's done a really good job with the Green Party in the UK in terms of social media presence and getting them in people's psyche, I guess, such that they are now challenging. Some polls are above Labour, so they're now the second biggest party. And some are questioning whether our politics is now Reform versus Greens. The thing about Zach Polanski is he just doesn't have the nous to run a country. I think it's way more complex than the quite, not facile, but I just don't think he's got the chops. If you look at him in interview, he's quite good on this kind of level, but when you go down deeper and you're looking at the numbers and you're looking at the understanding of how government works and so on and so forth, I honestly don't think he's got the chops. And the problem is, you know, I'd probably say the same for Nigel Farage, actually. And we're kind of moving away from an era of just serious, sensible, or albeit boring politicians, technocrats, and moving towards this era of populism. But you end up voting in people like Donald Trump, who haven't got the foggiest what they're doing. They honestly don't know what they're doing. So then they get manipulated very easily by people who do know what they're doing. Benjamin Netanyahu, maybe Stephen Miller, Russ Vought, people like proper ideologues. And then they are successfully manipulated. Anyway, now we're going to go on to Europe. So UK had this position where they're like, no. And then it was like, okay, things have changed. Yes, a bit. Spain have been like, no. So he said 23 years ago, Pedro Sánchez here speaking in Spanish, he said 23 years ago, another US administration dragged us into a war in the Middle East, a war that in theory, it was said at the time was being fought to eliminate Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction, bring democracy and ensure global security, but which in reality, seen in perspective, produced the opposite effect. It unleashed the greatest wave of insecurity that our continent has suffered since the fall of the Berlin Wall. The Iraq War generated a drastic increase in jihadist terrorism, a serious migration crisis in the Eastern Mediterranean, and generalized increase in energy prices. Like, you need to know how destabilizing the Iraq War was in terms of migration and security issues throughout Europe, right? If we don't learn from that, then that's ridiculous. So anyway, of course, Trump had something to say about Pedro Sánchez as well.
And now Spain actually said that we can't use their bases, and that's all right. We could use their base if we want. We could just fly in and use it. Nobody's going to tell us not to use it, but we don't have to. But they were.
So first of all, he's saying, do you know what? We could just ignore what he said. We're that powerful. We could just ignore what they say, and we're just flying and use it. That's a threat. So it's a threat to a NATO ally.
Unfriendly. And so I told him, we don't want to, Spain has absolutely nothing that we need other than great people. They have great people. And now.
So but then he also threatened them with tariffs, right? Which is, I think, pretty controversial. And here he is.
To us by the Supreme Court. And we have the right, as an example, we talked about Spain. I could tomorrow stop, or today, even better, stop everything having to do with Spain, all business having to do with Spain. I have the right to stop it. Embargoes, do anything I want with it. And we may do that with Spain. What do you think?
Well, sir, I think we're going to talk about it with you. I know that you have strong power. The Supreme Court clarified. We know you can use it. And if you need to use it to assure national and economic security, we'll do it.
Scott, do you have an opinion?
Sir, I agree. The Supreme Court reaffirmed your ability to implement an embargo. And as we've talked, from your first term, the Section 301s and the 232s have withheld more than 4,000 lawsuits. And USTR and Commerce are going to begin investigations, and we'll move forward with those.
And we've instituted a 15% tariff.
So threats against Spain there, while Friedrich Merz sits, some might say, idly by. Scott Percent then later said this.
Puts American lives at risk. The Spanish put American lives at risk.
So he's like, the Spanish have put American lives at risk, and he's kind of effectively supported the idea of sanctioning and tariffing Spain. Someone here says, wow, I'm in Barcelona, Spain right now. And let me tell you that the sentiment is what the sentiment is in Spain and all of Europe for that matter. They are shocked at the Trump regime's lies and blatant abuse of power. They don't support America's new war in Iran. And once again, we have Trump loyalists like Percent going on TV and spouting absolute lies. Incredibly sad. The United States government is a laughingstock of the entire world. And these neocons have been exposed for exactly what they are, complete fraud, says, I presume, an American, maybe not sure anyway, says Cyrus Janssen there presently in Spain. Now then we had Caroline Levitt come out and say actually Spain have now changed their position, and then the Spanish foreign minister came out and said no, we haven't.
With respect to Spain, I think they heard the president's message yesterday loud and clear. And it's my understanding over the past several hours, they've agreed to cooperate with the U.S. military.
Toda la Casa Blanca, pero yo soy el ministro de Asuntos.
It was a White House spokesperson, but I am the foreign minister of the foreign affairs of the government in Spain, he says. And I can tell you that our position on the use of the bases And the war in the Middle East, on the bombings in relation to Iran, has not changed at all. Where could this misunderstanding come from, Minister? I have no idea. And honestly, I have an enormous amount of work. At the moment, we are in the middle of several evacuation operations. Fortunately, the one from Iran. The Spaniards who wanted to leave Iran are already safe in Azerbaijan. We are in constant coordination with all of my counterparts in the region, as well as with the Europeans. Tomorrow, there's an ordinary council. I have no desire, nor I would almost say time to speculate. But what I can tell you is that our position remains absolutely unchanged. And I categorically deny any change or any indication. Where could it come from? I haven't the slightest idea. I mean, that's about as strong a repudiation of Caroline Levitt as you're going to get. This is how British News is reporting it.
What's happening with Spain?
Well, as you say, Sophie, Pedro Sánchez, the Spanish Prime Minister, firmly in the doghouse in Donald Trump's eyes. But to be frank, according to his televised address that he's made this morning, he doesn't really seem to care. To give people a bit of background,
It doesn't seem to care. Sanchez, like, yeah, not bothered.
to this, after Israel and the US started these strikes on Iran, it felt like for a few days that Spain was a lone voice in the EU questioning the legality of it. And then on Monday, we heard that the Spanish had said that the US couldn't use some of their bases to launch some of their operations. Now, that has clearly really annoyed Donald Trump, who yesterday, ahead of a meeting with the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, essentially threatened Spain with a trade war, saying that he could cut them off. Now, today, as I said, the Spanish Prime Minister's gone on telly, and to sum it up, his message to the US is no to war. He said to the people listening, no to the breakdown of international law, no to assuming that the world can solve its problems through conflicts involving bombs, and finally, no to repeating the mistakes of the past. Now, he said by standing up for the international rule of law, he wasn't backing the Ayatollahs. That isn't the case, but he called, he said, on Iran, Israel, and the US to stop.
And that's not a reference, it's a reflection, sorry, of Dalton's conversation with Nick Ferrari on LBC that we just saw. Oh, you're not backing the US, therefore you're backing the Ayatollah. What is it you love about the Ayatollah? No, I don't want to commit to an illegal war, and I don't like the Ayatollah. And that's what Pedro Sánchez is saying.
He mentioned that 23 years ago, the US pulled, in his words, the world into a conflict in the Middle East, which had long-lasting ramifications. He's asked that that does not happen again. So very clear, Spain is staying on course. There have been voices of support from the EU Commission, for example, with him today. We've also heard Emmanuel Macron, the French president, yesterday saying that they couldn't really back the legality of these strikes either, but a much softer position. So tensions continuing between Spain and the US.
Now, speaking, well, actually, before we get to France, it's also worth pointing out that the US runs a trade surplus with Spain. So they buy more stuff. The Spanish buy more stuff than we buy from them. So if you sanction Spain, it would hurt the US more than it would hurt Spain. Threatening to cut off all trade with them hurts American workers and exporters. This is just dumb, says Mike Levin. Really good point, and another example of Trump not really knowing what he's talking about. Here is Jason Horowitz reporting from Madrid, saying the Spanish government responded defiantly to Trump's threats to cut trade ties, saying no change can happen unilaterally. Quote, if the US administration wishes to review it, it must do so while respecting the autonomy of private companies, international law, and the bilateral agreements between the European Union and the United States, the government said in a statement. It added that the will of the government of Spain is and always will be to work for free trade and the economic cooperation among countries based on mutual respect and compliance with international law, because what citizens ask for and deserve is more prosperity, not more problems. And then, as mentioned, President Macron told Spanish Prime Minister Sanchez that France supports Spain and shows European solidarity after those economic threats. In fact, Macron described Trump's threats against Spain as economic coercion and expressed full solidarity with Spain and Sanchez on behalf of France. Others say, this is how we must act in the face of any threat coming from outside Europe. European solidarity cannot be negotiable, and it must not be, says Elisa Mussini. And indeed, Europe, I think, is circling the wagons to some degree, although, some might ask, where is the rest of Europe? Well done, France here. Where are other European voices? And also Friedrich Merz was criticized for not standing up for Spain and the UK publicly in the White House. Of course, that's a very difficult thing to do, isn't it? France joined Spain in condemning the US-Israeli attack on Iran, leaving Merz and von der Leyen looking like outliers. Merz's silence on Trump's boycott's threat to Spain is unforgettable, probably means unforgivable, especially as it is easy to challenge. No boycott can actually exist against the customs union and internal markets such as the EU. I mean, it doesn't make sense for him to unilaterally or explicitly, discreetly tariff Spain because they're part of the EU, which hold trade bloc. But subsequently, actually, Europeans have come out. So Antonio Costa, who's the EU president, EU Commission president, isn't he? Yeah. Oh, no, European Council. Sorry, I have just held a call with President Sanchez to express the EU's full solidarity with Spain. The EU will always ensure the interests of its member states are fully protected. We reaffirm our firm commitment to the principles of international law and a rules-based order everywhere in the world, said Costa. And I think actually we've got we also had, oh no, I don't have it. Ursula von der Leyen also made a statement as well that was much more supportive, I think, after initial kind of not full-throated condemnation or support either way on the matter. So I think Europe is starting to double down in support of leaders like Sanchez. Now, Merz, unfortunately, I think all of these ones are in German. Yeah, but the Chancellor Merz is now saying that he defended Keir Starmer strongly to Trump and didn't think the criticism was correct over Britain's stances over the weekend. So obviously this was in private later. Said it doesn't seem to wade too much with Donald Trump, though. So he defended Keir Starmer, but evidently didn't really go anywhere. But it's also a sign that Merz has been sensitive to the accusation that he didn't defend Spain as an EU partner or the UK as an E3 partner. So E3 being Germany, France, and the UK. Clash report says the German Chancellor said Spain is a member of the European Union. There's no way to treat Spain particularly poorly now. If so, we will all come to a common result, and that also includes Spain. He primarily tied the criticism to the NATO contribution, but that has nothing to do with the European efforts for an agreement, a trade agreement. As far as Great Britain's concerned, there were irritations over the weekend with regard to the approval of refueling stops at various American military bases located on British territory. I consider this criticism of him to be unjustified, especially after he corrected his originally restrictive stance. So Merz coming out and supporting both Sanchez and Starmer there, but not possibly in a particularly full-throated way. And in fact, Alex Taylor talking about how Merz is the opposite to Sanchez by saying, why didn't you do anything to stop well, in fact, we'll listen to this because this is fairly, I think, significant view here. I'm going to read out subtitles. This is in German. He says, there may also come a time when it becomes too late, he says, and I do not want to be one of those for whom it was too late, because in the future, people won't ask us, did you do everything according to international law? They will be asking, why didn't you prevent this earlier? So in other words, Merz here is saying, and I do understand this, like I understand the idea that in 50 years' time, we won't be going, oh, did Germany stand for international law at this point? Or it's more like, were they trying to deal with the threat of Islamic fundamentalism as a regime in Iran? He says, being questioned, why didn't you, in this hypothetical, why didn't you prevent this earlier? As Germany and as the German government, We always want international law to be respected. And we aren't applying double standards, but we have to ask ourselves the question, what should we do when international law clearly reaches its limits? And when we are faced with adversaries who are not willing to abide by these same rules of international law, and if you apply the rules of law, international law here, then you can either ask whether there wasn't I need to reformulate this. Then you can even ask whether there wasn't a direct danger and threat coming from Iran. So these are questions which isn't legitimate to ask, but this was above all about hitting this regime where it hurts after it showed itself as not ready to find solutions at the negotiating table. Now, obviously translation, a few issues there maybe. The idea is that he thinks that international law has reached its limits. So it's okay to break it then. The problem is that's a race to the bottom. You either adhere to international law or you don't. So I do have a problem with Merz's position, but I think he was trying to straddle the fence there and be everything to everyone. But yeah, he doesn't think Trump's criticism of Starmer is justified and praised the really, really big, valuable contribution Starmer is making to the E3 format to ending the war in Ukraine. So that's also really important. I'm not going to read that out, but basically he's a big fan of Starmer in terms of trying to bring about the end of the war in Ukraine for the benefit of Ukraine, right? And that's the power of the E3 at the moment, and Europe in general, Hungary and Slovakia notwithstanding. Then we have Canada, and Canada came out and initially supported the US but wouldn't commit to helping the US, but said that they were all for it, kind of thing. Then Carney has been, I think, probably under a bit of pressure, because I was listening to Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell talk about this. Rory Stewart was saying there's not really been any coordination between allies, and that's kind of understandable. You each have your own sovereignty, right? So if the US want you to do something, then you don't necessarily say, hang on, Donald, I just need to phone up everyone else and see what they think, and then get together, right? What's our common strategy? What you react and you go, right, well, we actually agree with you or we disagree with you, and this is what we're going to do, especially if you're outside of the EU. But I think there is possibly, because Mark Carney was talking about this new world order. Well, here's your time for the new world order to stand up and to work together with other nations outside of the US hegemony. Okay. And then actually when the first opportunity, you just bent your knee to the US. So I think he's receiving some criticism for that. Here is Mark Carney.
The United States and Israel have acted without engaging the United Nations or consulting allies, including Canada. So where to from here? With a rapidly spreading conflict and growing threats to civilian life. Canada reaffirms that international law binds all belligerents. We condemn the strikes carried out by Iran on civilians and civilian infrastructure across the Middle East. And we implore all parties, including the United States and Israel, to respect the rules of international engagement. Canada calls for a rapid de-escalation of hostilities and is prepared to assist in achieving this goal.
Okay, so, I mean, you can try and unpick the syntax here. The quote, the United States and Israel acted without engaging the United Nations or consulting allies. Does it mean that he's saying it's an illegal war? It means that they haven't sought the UN legal justification and they didn't consult allies, including Canada. But he's on the record initially supporting it. So I don't know. I get a sense he's kind of rowing back some of that initial support and being a little bit more tempered and more in line with maybe a kind of Starmer style approach or with more European views. It's interesting that, well, we'll come to Mark Rutte in a second to finish it off, but then when asked about Donald Trump specific...
What was President Trump's reaction to you supporting the airstrikes on Iran?
I haven't spoken to the president.
What does that say about your relationship?
President's... I don't think it says anything, to be honest.
Did you receive nothing from the Americans?
Look, we take a position... let me just make a clear point. We took a position, not asking for something. We took a position because we view the nuclear threat and the export of terrorism of Iran over decades as one of the gravest threats to international peace and security. And the Americans and the Israelis haven't taken this action in that limited sense. We supported that aspect. That is not a blank check. That is not us participating. That is not us asking for something in exchange for that. None of that's true. That is just a straight up position.
What was President?
So again, I think actually he's probably more aligned with Merz really in kind of like, I think he's a bit all over the place, and that's the problem, because there is this gray area between, and you find it in the comments, you guys have that spectrum of beliefs, right? A lot of you are saying it's a legal war, we don't like Iran, but it's a legal war, it should be done in a different way, and if you are going to attack militarily, you've got to get that legal justification first before you then go in. And other people just saying, well, yeah, okay, but these guys suck, and it warrants kind of bending international law or ignoring international law, sort of like what Merz was saying, down to a kind of Trumpian approach who don't really give a damn. I am my own morality, and if I want to go and smack up Iran, I'm going to go and do that. And then, you know, then there's all the questions about, or is it you doing that, or is it Israel, so on and so forth. But you got that whole spectrum, and I think that is that's why it's difficult, because it is difficult, because there aren't clear right or wrong answers, or at least there are clear legal answers. I think you can probably get a black and white answer from a technical legal point of view, but from a moral point of view, which isn't the same as morality. From a moral point of view, you can get a whole range of answers, and it's not immediately obvious what the right answer is. You know, it depends what you're putting into your function machine and what you find as incredibly important. Is it important to adhere to international law to the point where you shouldn't do something that you would otherwise like to do? And it depends how you feel about that. So everyone has their different opinions in these threads for the videos I produce, for example, and that is how international leaders will be seeing it. And the challenge is that if you think Europe should be standing up to the United States, you have a whole bunch of leaders, some of who will be supportive of what the United States is doing, and others who clearly aren't, like Pedro Sánchez, and other people who sit in the middle, a sort of Friedrich Merz sort of position, and Keir Starmer as well. And yeah, so that's where we are. I mean, I was going to say Mark Rutte. So Mark Rutte has come out and said that actually lots of European leaders, as the Secretary General of NATO, lots of European leaders are really supportive of what Trump is doing. He's the Trump whisperer. He's trying to be all slimy with Trump. Say, actually, it's fine that loads of Europeans really do support you. To which the Spanish Defense Minister Robles has come out and said, that's not true. You don't speak on behalf of us, type thing. And so Mark Rutte needs to be careful, because actually there's a genuine section in the EU that is not willing to defend Trump's actions and the American actions in Iran. So it's quite dangerous for Rutte to speak on behalf of all of NATO there. And I think it's probably a lot more controversial than Mark Rutte is letting on. So this is very, very difficult, but it doesn't help when you have an American leader who is a petulant toddler that throws his toys out the pram at the first sign of someone saying no. Okay, that's enough from me. Let me know what you think. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.